A nurse saw that a millionaire had thrown a luxury rug into the trash. She quickly decided to pick it up and unroll it. As soon as she opened it, her body shook. Emily Taylor wiped her brow and leaned against the counter in the break room of St. Vincent's Hospital. The night shift had been particularly grueling. 2 emergency surgeries, 3 incoming trauma patients, and a dozen smaller crises requiring her deft attention. It wasn't uncommon for her to work 14-hour shifts, but today, the exhaustion pressed down like a weight she couldn't shake. Emily wasn't just a nurse. She was the sole provider for her 2 children and her aging mother. A widow at 34, she had grown accustomed to sacrifice. Her late husband's passing had left a void, not only in her heart but in their finances. The modest life insurance payout had been quickly swallowed by debt, leaving her scrambling to make ends meet. Her children, Anna and Ben, were her world. Anna, 12, was an avid reader with dreams of becoming a doctor, inspired by her mother's unwavering dedication. Ben, only 8, had a curious mind that often asked questions about the stars. Emily longed to give them a better life, but with rent, groceries, and medical bills piling up, even small luxuries like new school supplies felt like a stretch. Despite her struggles, Emily's compassion for others remained unshaken. At work, she was the nurse everyone relied on, the one who stayed late to comfort a scared patient or filled in for coworkers when they couldn't make it. "You need to take care of yourself too," her friend and colleague Mary often reminded her. But Emily brushed it off. If she could ease someone's pain, her exhaustion seemed worth it. Tonight, the weariness in her legs was matched only by the ache in her chest. The holidays were approaching, and Anna had mentioned a school trip that Emily knew she couldn't afford. It wasn't the first time she had felt the pang of guilt for not being able to provide everything her children deserved. As she shrugged on her worn-out coat and grabbed her bag, she whispered a small prayer for strength. It was a ritual she performed often, not out of habit but necessity. Emily believed in small miracles, even if life rarely granted her one. Little did she know tonight would be different. With a resigned sigh, she stepped out into the crisp autumn night, her mind swirling with worries about the future. The air was cool and sharp as Emily stepped out of the hospital, her breath forming faint clouds in the dim glow of the streetlights. The quiet of the deserted streets offered a stark contrast to the bustling chaos she had left behind at work. With each step, the ache in her feet seemed to intensify, but she pushed through it, longing for the comfort of her small apartment. The neighborhood she walked through wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't particularly welcoming either. Time and neglect had left their mark. Faded paint on the houses, cracked sidewalks sprouting weeds, and a few streetlights flickering ominously. Still, this was the only route home. Cutting through the quieter residential streets shaved 10 minutes off her commute, minutes that felt precious when she was so bone-tired. Emily pulled her coat tighter around herself as the chill seeped in. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, its weight a reminder of the extra supplies she'd taken home to help Anna with her science project. The thought of Anna's excitement at the project brought a faint smile to Emily's lips, even as she wished she could do more. As she rounded a corner, she found herself passing a property she always tried not to notice. A large, abandoned house on the edge of the neighborhood. Once a grand estate, it now sat in disrepair, its windows dark and shutters hanging askew. Overgrown vines twisted around the wrought iron gate, and the front yard, once manicured, was now a jungle of neglect. The house belonged to Marcus Langston, a reclusive millionaire whose name carried an air of mystery and scandal. Rumors swirled about his business dealings. Some said he was a genius entrepreneur, others whispered of shady backdoor operations. Emily didn't care much for gossip, but something about the house always gave her a sense of unease, as if it harbored secrets too heavy for its crumbling walls. As she passed by the rusted gate, her gaze caught on something unusual. Just outside the dumpster at the edge of the property, a glimpse of rich burgundy and gold shimmered faintly under the dim streetlights. She slowed her pace, curiosity prickling her exhaustion. A rug. At least she thought it was a rug. Its edges were ornate, with delicate patterns that looked far too expensive to be discarded so carelessly. Emily glanced around. The street was empty. the silence punctuated only by the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The thought struck her. Why would someone throw away something so luxurious? And at a house like this? Her feet hesitated, her curiosity warring with the urge to keep moving. A strange sense of unease settled over her, but she pushed it aside. She took a step closer. Emily stood frozen for a moment, the cold air brushing against her face as she stared at the mysterious rug sticking out of the dumpster. She glanced up and down the empty street, her heartbeat quickening. What was a rug like that doing here? It looked pristine, its intricate patterns gleaming faintly even in the dim light. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and practicality, Emily stepped closer. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the fabric, and she realized just how soft it was. Luxurious in a way she'd only ever seen in high-end magazines or movies. She tugged at it gently, but the rug was heavier than she expected. Gripping it firmly, she pulled it free from the dumpster's grasp, letting it unfurl slightly onto the cracked pavement. To her surprise, there was no noticeable damage. No stains, no tears. It was exquisite, a piece clearly crafted with care and worth a fortune. Her mind raced. Why would someone throw this away? And more importantly, could it be salvaged? Emily glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out and accuse her of stealing. But the street remained quiet, the abandoned house looming dark and silent behind her. She carefully rolled the rug back up, hoisting it awkwardly onto her shoulder. If nothing else, it could be useful at home, a little piece of comfort for her family's modest living room. Her steps quickened as she made her way back to her apartment. She struggled with the weight of the rug in her bag, the chill of the night cutting through her thin coat. When she finally reached her building, she slipped inside, her breath fogging up in the dim hallway. Her children were fast asleep, and the apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily unrolled the rug in the middle of the living room, eager to get a better look at her unusual find. But as the last fold fell flat, her breath caught in her throat. Tucked neatly inside the rug was a thick envelope, its edges sealed and bearing no markings. She hesitated, her pulse pounding. With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and slowly opened it. Her eyes widened as a cascade of crisp bills spilled onto the rug. Hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars in neatly bound stacks. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, clutching the envelope. Among the money was a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, she found a single sentence scrawled in elegant handwriting. "This is your second chance. Use it wisely." Emily's body shook as questions flooded her mind. Who left this money? Was it a trap? And what could second chance possibly mean? Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the money as if it might vanish or come alive. Her fingers hovered over the crisp stacks, but she couldn't bring herself to touch them again. The note lay beside her, its cryptic message swirling in her mind. This is your second chance. Use it wisely. She didn't know whether to feel elated or terrified. For someone like Emily, who struggled to make ends meet, this kind of money was unimaginable. A quick estimate put the total somewhere in the range of $50,000. More than enough to clear her debts, pay for Anna's school trip, and even start a small savings fund for Ben. But something about the situation felt wrong. Why had it been hidden inside the rug? Who would abandon such wealth in such a careless way? The luxurious rug, the cryptic note, none of it added up. Emily's first thought was to report the discovery to the police. It was the logical, responsible thing to do. Yet another thought gnawed at the edges of her conscience. What if this is fate? Her children's faces flashed in her mind. Anna with her growing list of school expenses, Ben's dream of owning a telescope, her mother's increasing medical needs. This money could solve so many problems, could change everything. But if it had ties to something illegal, could she live with that? She shoved the envelope back into the rug and leaned back against the worn-out sofa. The temptation to keep the money clashed with her principles, leaving her paralyzed. Her mind wrestled with every scenario, every potential consequence. By dawn, her exhaustion and anxiety had won out. She knew she couldn't handle this alone. Emily needed someone she trusted to help her make sense of the situation. That's when she thought of Detective Ryan. A family acquaintance and occasional dinner guest, Ryan had always been fair and approachable. He worked in a nearby precinct and had earned a reputation for integrity. If anyone could help her navigate this, it was him. With a deep breath, Emily wrapped the envelope back inside the rug and folded it carefully. She would bring it to Ryan after her shift, but the thought left her uneasy. What if someone was watching her? What if this money was tied to dangerous people? As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Emily resolved to act carefully. She couldn't risk endangering her family, but she also couldn't ignore the feeling that this rug, and the money it held, was the beginning of something much bigger than herself. Emily spent the rest of the day in a fog of unease. At work, she struggled to focus on her tasks, distracted by the weight of the rug and its contents hidden in her car trunk. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She decided to wait until the evening to meet Detective Ryan, hoping to avoid drawing attention. But by the time her shift ended, the sense of unease had grown into a gnawing fear. As she walked out of the hospital, she noticed a black car idling at the far end of the parking lot. Its windows were tinted, and it didn't belong to any of her co-workers. Emily's pulse quickened, but she tried to dismiss it as a coincidence. She unlocked her car, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The black car hadn't moved, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she drove toward the precinct, she made sure to take a circuitous route, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The black car didn't follow her, but her paranoia lingered. When she arrived at Detective Ryan's office, the calm atmosphere of the station did little to soothe her nerves. Ryan greeted her with his usual easygoing smile, but his expression shifted to concern as she explained what she'd found. She carefully unwrapped the envelope from the rug, placing it on his desk alongside the note. Ryan's brows furrowed as he examined the bills and the cryptic message. "This is a lot of money, Emily," he said, his tone grave. "And this note? It's vague, but it feels deliberate. Whoever left this wanted you to find it. And for a reason." Emily's voice trembled as she replied, "I don't know what to do, Ryan. My family could really use this money, but what if it's tied to something dangerous?" Ryan nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the note again. "You were right to come to me. I'll start looking into this, but I need you to be careful. If this money is tied to anything criminal, the people behind it won't want it traced." Emily left the precinct feeling slightly reassured, but the sense of dread returned as she pulled into her apartment complex. Just as she stepped out of her car, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, expecting a text from Ryan or a work notification, but the message was anonymous. "Forget the rug. This is your only warning." Emily froze, her stomach twisting. Someone new. The anonymous message lingered in Emily's mind long after she had locked the doors and checked the windows of her small apartment. Sleep was elusive, her thoughts spinning with fear and dread. By morning, she felt the weight of her decision more than ever. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about keeping her family safe. She woke early, determined to discuss everything with Detective Ryan again. But as she prepared breakfast for her kids, the phone rang. When she answered, there was silence on the other end, until a deep, raspy voice spoke two chilling words: "Walk away." Emily's heart pounded as she hung up, her hands trembling. She forced a smile when Anna and Ben entered the kitchen, but they could sense her unease. "Everything okay, Mom?" Anna asked, her big brown eyes searching her mother's face. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Just a little tired, sweetheart. Finish your cereal. We're running late." Once the kids were at school, she drove straight to the precinct, her grip tight on the steering wheel. As she walked through the station doors, her resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let these threats control her life. She owed it to her children to do the right thing. Detective Ryan was waiting for her in his office, his face lined with concern. "I did some digging last night," he began after she sat down. "That property where you found the rug. It belongs to Marcus Langston. Emily's stomach dropped. She had heard of Langston. His name was synonymous with wealth and power in the city. What does he have to do with this? She asked. Ryan leaned forward, his voice low. Langston's been under investigation for years. We suspect he's involved in a fraudulent medical network, embezzling funds, overcharging insurance companies, and using shell corporations to launder money. If this cash is tied to him, you're in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. So, what do we do? Ryan's expression softened. I need you to cooperate with me, Emily. If we can tie this money to Langston, it could be the evidence we've been looking for. But you need to understand the risks. These people don't play fair. Emily swallowed hard, fear clawing at her resolve. But when she thought about the anonymous threats, the shadowy figures near her home, and the possibility of Langston escaping justice, her fear turned into determination. I'll help, she said finally, her voice steady. Whatever it takes. Ryan nodded. I'll assign someone to keep an eye on you and your family. But you need to stay vigilant, Emily. Things might get worse before they get better. As she left the precinct, a mix of fear and resolve coursed through her. She was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't turn back now. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and tension. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was constantly being watched. The black car reappeared outside her apartment, lingering for hours before disappearing. Anonymous calls continued, each one more threatening than the last. Even her kids noticed her unease, and it broke her heart to see the worry in their eyes. Then it happened. Emily had just finished her shift at the hospital and was gathering her things from the locker room when she felt it, a presence behind her. She turned and there he was, Marcus Langston. His tailored suit and perfectly groomed appearance were a stark contrast to the shadow of menace in his eyes. He gave her a tight-lipped smile, one that sent a shiver down her spine. Miss Taylor, he said smoothly, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority. We need to talk. Emily's throat went dry. She glanced around, but the locker room was empty. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Langston chuckled, taking a step closer. Oh, I think you do. That rug. That money. You've involved yourself in something you shouldn't have. His tone hardened, his gaze locking onto hers. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Emily gripped the strap of her bag tightly, her pulse hammering in her ears. I've already given everything to the police, she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. If you want the money back, take it up with them. Langston's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. You think that's going to protect you? The police can't help you. All it takes is one mistake, one moment of carelessness, and your family could pay the price. His words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. But then she thought of her children, their innocent faces flashing in her mind. She squared her shoulders, refusing to let him see her fear. You can threaten me all you want, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I won't stay silent. You won't get away with this. Langston stared at her, his eyes narrowing. Then he leaned in, his voice a low growl. You're making a big mistake, Miss Taylor. A mistake you can't undo. With that, he turned and strode out of the locker room, leaving her trembling but resolute. She knew now more than ever that she couldn't back down. Langston's threats had only strengthened her resolve. As Emily left the hospital that night, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with anticipation. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras ready to capture every moment. The trial of Marcus Langston had drawn immense public interest, with whispers of fraud, corruption, and now threats against a nurse who had stumbled into his web of deceit. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Detective Ryan sat beside her, offering quiet encouragement. Across the room, Langston sat with his team of high-powered lawyers. His expression was calm, even smug, as though the trial was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His confidence unnerved Emily, but she forced herself to focus. She had come too far to back down now. The prosecution began by laying out the case against Langston. Years of siphoning money from fraudulent medical claims, laundering funds through offshore accounts, and bribing officials to avoid scrutiny. The rug, the cash, and the cryptic note were presented as evidence of his attempt to dispose of incriminating funds. Emily's role as the unwitting finder of this evidence became a key piece of the puzzle. When it was her turn to testify, Emily took a deep breath and approached the stand. The prosecutor guided her through her story, how she had found the rug, the money and the note, and the threats that had followed. Her voice wavered at times, but she spoke with conviction. She described the confrontation with Langston, how he had tried to intimidate her into silence. Langston's lead attorney was quick to attack. His cross-examination was relentless, questioning Emily's motives, her credibility, and even her financial struggles. "Isn't it true," he asked, his tone dripping with condescension, "that you were tempted to keep the money for yourself?" Emily's stomach churned, but she met his gaze. "I didn't keep the money," she said firmly. "I turned it over to the police because I knew it wasn't mine." The lawyer smirked. "And yet you're here today, claiming to be a victim. Isn't it possible you're using this trial for attention? Perhaps even a financial windfall?" Before Emily could respond, the prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained. But the damage was done. Emily's credibility had been called into question, and she could feel the weight of the jury's scrutiny. Then, just as the defense seemed to be gaining ground, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. Langston's former assistant had come forward with a treasure trove of evidence: emails, audio recordings, and financial documents tying Langston directly to the fraudulent schemes. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the recordings played. Langston's calm demeanor cracked, his face growing pale as the damning evidence mounted. The tide of the trial had shifted. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably as the assistant's testimony began. Jennifer Mallory, a former personal assistant to Marcus Langston, took the stand with a nervous yet determined expression. The prosecution wasted no time. They introduced her as a key witness who had first-hand knowledge of Langston's operations and had provided crucial evidence to corroborate Emily's story. Jennifer described in painstaking detail how Langston had orchestrated his schemes. She recounted late-night meetings where cash-filled envelopes were discussed, fraudulent invoices created, and instructions given to launder money through his shell corporations. But the moment that shook the courtroom came when the prosecution played an audio recording. The scratchy sound of a hidden microphone filled the air, and Langston's voice emerged, calm and calculating. "Get rid of everything that can tie us to this. Burn the documents, shred the files. That rug. Dump it somewhere far away. And make sure no one gets curious. We can't afford loose ends." The words hit Emily like a jolt of electricity. The rug, her rug, had been a loose end. Langston's casual mention of its disposal, coupled with his chilling tone, made it clear just how close she had come to being silenced. Langston's lawyers scrambled to object, arguing the recording's authenticity, but the damage was done. Jennifer went on to provide additional emails that further implicated Langston, detailing payments to officials and the use of offshore accounts to funnel stolen funds. When the prosecution rested its case, the defense tried to regain control, but their arguments rang hollow. The jury's expressions had shifted, their skepticism of Emily replaced by a growing anger toward Langston. Even Langston's once impenetrable composure began to crack. The final nail in the coffin came during Langston's own testimony. Pressed by the prosecution and confronted with the mountain of evidence against him, he faltered. His attempts to explain away the recordings and documents only made him appear more desperate. By the end of his cross-examination, he was visibly rattled. As the trial drew to a close, the judge delivered instructions to the jury. Emily sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. Hours later, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. When the judge announced Langston's conviction and his sentencing, Decades in prison and the forfeiture of his assets, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Tears welled in her eyes as the courtroom erupted into applause. Justice had been served not just for her, but for everyone Langston had wronged. As Emily stepped out of the courthouse, a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying lifted from her shoulders. The sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the storm that had been her life over the past weeks. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras and microphones aimed at her, but she wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about her children, about how she could finally go home and tell them that they were safe. Langston's conviction sent shockwaves through the city. News outlets covered the story relentlessly, painting Emily as the nurse who had taken on a corrupt millionaire and won. More importantly, the government moved quickly to confiscate Langston's assets, using the funds to repay the victims of his fraudulent schemes. To Emily's astonishment, part of the settlement included a sizable financial reparation for her role in exposing Langston's crimes and her willingness to testify despite the threats against her. The amount was life-changing. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about overdue bills or stretching her paycheck to cover groceries. Emily's courage also inspired broader reforms in the healthcare system. Investigations revealed how Langston's fraudulent network had exploited vulnerable patients and overburdened providers. Public outcry led to sweeping changes, ensuring stricter oversight and accountability in the medical industry. Emily's name was often mentioned in articles and news segments about these changes, her actions celebrated as a catalyst for justice. Still, the greatest victory was the peace that finally returned to her home. The threats stopped, the anonymous calls ceased, and the shadowy figures who had haunted her life vanished. Her children noticed the change immediately. Anna, who had grown unusually quiet during the ordeal, started smiling again. Ben's laughter filled their apartment, and Emily's mother began to worry less, her health improving with each passing day. One evening, as Emily tucked her children into bed, Anna asked softly, "Mom, are we really going to be okay now?" Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. I promise." The words felt solid, unshakable. For the first time in a long time, Emily truly believed them. The money Langston had tried to hide became a tool for good, not just for her family but for countless others who had suffered under his schemes. Emily no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. She had faced danger and fear head-on, and in doing so, she had found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The settlement money wasn't just a lifeline for Emily. It was an opportunity to fulfill dreams she'd long buried under the weight of her struggles. After ensuring her children's needs were met, she turned her attention to something larger. Emily had always believed in the power of community, and now, for the first time, she had the means to make a difference. One of her first initiatives was opening a small health clinic in her neighborhood. For years, the community had lacked access to affordable medical care, and Emily knew firsthand the toll it took on families. The clinic became a beacon of hope, offering low-cost checkups, vaccinations, and counseling services. Emily worked tirelessly to hire compassionate staff, and Detective Ryan helped secure partnerships with local organizations to keep the clinic running. Word spread quickly, and the clinic became a gathering place. Its waiting room filled not just with patients but with stories of resilience and camaraderie. Emily's reputation as a hero only grew. People saw her not just as the nurse who had stood up to corruption, but as a leader who cared deeply about her neighbors. The ripple effect of her efforts was undeniable. Other professionals in the community stepped forward, inspired by Emily's example. A retired teacher began offering free tutoring sessions at the clinic, helping kids catch up on schoolwork. Local businesses donated supplies and funds, their owners eager to be part of the positive change. Even Anna and Ben joined in, volunteering on weekends to distribute pamphlets and greet visitors. The transformation of the community wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Fear and mistrust, once pervasive, were replaced by a sense of solidarity. People began looking out for one another, offering help where it was needed. Emily often marveled at how a single act of courage, her decision to take the rug and follow the trail it uncovered, had ignited such profound change. Despite the demands of her new responsibilities, Emily made time for her family. With the financial burden lifted, she could afford small luxuries, like piano lessons for Anna and a telescope for Ben. But more than material comforts, she cherished the moments of togetherness. The laughter around the dinner table, the lazy Sunday mornings spent reading stories, and the walks in the park where they dreamed about the future. The once-worn apartment now felt like a home filled with warmth and possibility. And though Emily's life had taken an unexpected turn, she wouldn't have changed a thing. She had found her purpose, not just as a mother or a nurse, but as a force for good in a world that desperately needed hope. One quiet evening, Emily sat on the small balcony of her apartment, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. The warm hues of twilight reflected in her eyes, which were no longer clouded by the worry that had shadowed her life for so long. Instead, there was a calm, a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. As the evening breeze rustled the potted plants her mother had lovingly arranged, Emily let her mind wander over the whirlwind of events that had brought her here. She thought about the woman she had been just weeks ago, exhausted, uncertain, and afraid. That Emily had been hesitant to act, overwhelmed by her circumstances. But the challenges she had faced, the courage she had found within herself, had transformed her in ways she hadn't expected. She had learned to trust her instincts, to lean on others when necessary, and to stand firm in the face of intimidation. She had discovered that bravery wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. And most importantly, she had found a new sense of purpose, not just as a nurse or a provider, but as someone capable of creating lasting change. Her children's laughter floated through the open window behind her, a sound that filled her heart with gratitude. Anna and Ben had blossomed in the wake of their family's newfound stability. Anna had just been accepted into an advanced science program at school, and Emily smiled at the thought of her daughter's ambitious plans to become a doctor. Ben had been spending evenings on their balcony, gazing at the stars through the telescope Emily had gifted him, his curious mind soaking in the wonders of the universe. Even her mother seemed lighter, her health improving with each day. She often reminded Emily of how proud her late husband would have been, and Emily took comfort in the thought. She knew he would have wanted her to find peace and happiness, and now at last she had. The clinic was thriving, a testament to what was possible when people came together with a shared vision. Emily often walked its halls, greeting patients and staff, marveling at how something that had once been a dream had become a reality. The walls were lined with photos of smiling families, thank you notes, and even a few awards recognizing the clinic's impact on the community. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Emily turned her gaze to the horizon. She had come so far, and yet she knew her journey was far from over. But she wasn't afraid of the road ahead. She was ready for whatever came next, her heart full of hope and determination. The day they moved into their new home was filled with excitement and emotion. It wasn't a mansion, but to Emily and her family, it might as well have been. The two-story house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall oak trees and a neatly kept lawn. Its wide front porch invited lazy afternoons and warm memories yet to be made. Emily had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with her kids to pick out furniture, paint colors, and decorations. It was the first time in her life she could afford to make decisions based on what they wanted, rather than what they could afford. Anna had chosen a pale lavender for her room, her growing collection of books already neatly organized on new shelves. Ben's room was a galaxy of deep blues and silvers, with glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling. As they unpacked boxes and arranged their belongings, Emily paused to take it all in. The smell of fresh paint, the sound of her children laughing as they explored their new space, and the sight of her mother sitting comfortably in a sunny corner of the living room, all of it filled her with a profound sense of gratitude. Later that evening, they gathered in the backyard, where Emily had set up a small fire pit. The cool autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and the sound of crickets chirping. As they roasted marshmallows and told stories, Emily looked around at her family, her heart swelling with pride and love. Anna leaned her head on Emily's shoulder, her voice soft. "Mom, I still can't believe this is ours. Feels like a dream." Emily wrapped an arm around her daughter. "It's real, sweetheart. And it's just the beginning." Ben, with a streak of marshmallow on his cheek, looked up at the sky through his telescope. "Mom, look. There's Jupiter," he exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. Emily followed his gaze, smiling. The stars seemed brighter here, and so did their future. For Emily, the house wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome. It was a reminder that even when life felt insurmountable, hope and resilience could carve a path forward. She thought about the rug, the trial, and all the fear and uncertainty that had once consumed her. Every moment had led to this, a new chapter where she and her family could finally thrive. As the fire crackled and the stars shone above, Emily felt a quiet peace settle over her. They were safe, happy, and together. And that was all she had ever wanted. Emily's story spread far beyond her neighborhood. It became a tale of resilience and justice, shared at local schools, community events, and even on national news. Her decision to stand up to Marcus Langston and expose his corruption resonated with people from all walks of life. To many, Emily wasn't just a nurse. She was a symbol of courage, a reminder that even ordinary people could make an extraordinary difference. Invitations to speak at events poured in, but Emily remained grounded. While she attended a few engagements to share her experiences, her heart remained with her work at the clinic. She believed her true impact came from helping people directly, one patient at a time. The clinic had grown into a cornerstone of the community. With the funds from Langston's settlement and support from local organizations, it expanded its services, adding a dental suite, a mental health counseling center, and a nutrition program. Emily hired a diverse team of professionals who shared her vision of compassionate care, and together, they transformed lives. One day, during a visit to a nearby high school, Emily was invited to speak to a group of students. She stood before them, her voice steady but heartfelt, as she recounted her journey. She spoke not just about the challenges she faced, but about the choices she made, the courage to act when fear threatened to paralyze her. "I'm not a hero," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm just someone who chose to do what was right, even when it was hard. And every single one of you has that same power. The world needs people who are willing to stand up, speak out, and make a difference." The students erupted into applause, some even approaching her afterward to thank her for inspiring them. Many left with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to follow her example. Emily's influence extended beyond her local community. Healthcare professionals reached out, asking for guidance on creating similar clinics in underserved areas. Organizations invited her to collaborate on initiatives to reform healthcare practices nationwide. Though the scale of these opportunities was overwhelming, Emily approached them with the same determination she'd shown in the courtroom. Despite her growing recognition, Emily stayed humble. She continued to work long hours at the clinic, greet every patient with a smile, and return home each night to her family. To her, the greatest legacy wasn't in awards or accolades, but in the lives she helped transform. Her story became a beacon of hope, reminding others that courage, kindness, and integrity could ripple outward, changing the world in ways no one could predict. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Emily found herself sitting on a bench in the park near her new home. The sun was warm, filtering through the branches above and casting dappled patterns on the ground. Her children played nearby. Anna was helping Ben assemble a small rocket he'd built for a school project, their laughter carrying through the crisp air. Emily leaned back, letting the moment wash over her. Life had taken her down a path she never could have imagined. There had been so many times when she felt like giving up, when the weight of her responsibilities had felt too much to bear. But now, as she watched her children thrive and her community blossom, she realized those moments had shaped her into who she was today. Her thoughts wandered to the rug, the catalyst for everything that had happened. It had been a symbol of mystery and danger, but also of opportunity and transformation. Without it, she might never have discovered the strength and determination that lay dormant within her. What had once been a discarded piece of fabric had become a turning point in her life, a reminder that even the smallest actions could lead to profound change. Her phone buzzed softly beside her, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Detective Ryan. Just saw the news about the clinic's expansion. You're doing amazing work, Emily. Proud of you. Emily smiled, typing a quick reply of thanks. Ryan had been a steady presence through the storm, and she was grateful for his unwavering support. His encouragement had been a lifeline during her darkest moments, and she made a mental note to invite him over for dinner soon. As the afternoon wore on, her mother joined her on the bench, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've done well, Emily," she said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "Your father would have been so proud." Emily's throat tightened, and she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She thought of her late husband, of the promises they had made to build a better life for their family. She hoped, wherever he was, he could see how far they had come. As the rocket launched into the sky, propelled by Ben's eager hands, Emily looked up. The tiny contrail disappeared into the blue, a symbol of endless possibilities. Her family was safe. Her community was thriving. And through it all, Emily had discovered her own strength and purpose. The world wasn't perfect, but as she wrapped her arms around her mother and watched her children cheer, she knew this. The fight for what was right was always worth it. And in the end, it wasn't just the rug that had been unrolled. It was her courage, her integrity, and her unwavering hope for a better future. This story reminds us that bravery doesn't always begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with a single step, a choice to do what's right even when it's terrifying. Emily's journey is a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary people.